The wind came down from the mountains like something with teeth. It carved through the canyon passes, stripping bark from the lodgepole pines and turning morning frost into razor-edged crystals that cut at exposed skin. The frontier territories in late November were unforgiving, a sprawling wilderness of high desert plateaus and timbered ridges where civilization existed only in scattered pockets, and mercy was a luxury most folks couldn't afford. Darian Voss had learned that truth the hard way. He'd been riding the northern boundary of his property since dawn, checking fence lines that winter always found ways to destroy. His horse, a gray mare named Ash, picked her way carefully through the rocky terrain, breath steaming in the frigid air. Darian kept his collar turned up against the wind, his mind half on the work and half on the supplies he'd need to haul up from Bridger's Crossing before the first real snow closed the pass. He wasn't thinking about finding anyone. The frontier had taught him not to look for trouble, because trouble had a way of finding you regardless. After Sarah and the kids had died, consumption, the doctor said, though Darian suspected the isolation had killed them just as surely as any disease, he'd retreated into these mountains with the kind of deliberate solitude that told other people to stay the hell away. He kept cattle, fixed what broke, and spoke to exactly no one unless commerce demanded it. That was the agreement he'd made with the world. Leave me alone, and I'll do the same. The agreement shattered when he found her. At first, Darian thought it was a dead animal. Something dark and crumpled lay in the shallow ravine where spring meltwater had carved a path through the limestone. Ash noticed it too, ears flicking forward, steps slowing. Darian urged her closer, squinting against the glare of sun on frost. Then the dark shape moved. Christ. Darian was off his horse before he'd consciously decided to dismount, boots crunching through the brittle ground cover. The woman, and it was definitely a woman, he could see that now, lay face down in the frozen mud, one arm twisted beneath her body, dark hair matted with blood and dirt. Her clothes were shredded, hanging in strips that exposed skin mottled with bruises and cuts. She wasn't moving anymore. Darian crouched beside her, instinct warring with caution. Out here, you didn't survive by making assumptions. She could be bait for an ambush, could be diseased, could be trouble wearing a victim's face. His hand hovered over her shoulder, then she sucked in a breath, ragged, wet, desperate. Easy, Darian said, though he wasn't sure if he was talking to her or himself. Easy now. He touched her shoulder gently, ready to pull back if she startled. She flinched but didn't pull away. Carefully, he rolled her onto her side. The damage was worse than he'd thought. Her face was a mosaic of bruises, one eye swollen completely shut, lips split and crusted with dried blood. But it was her leg that made Darian's stomach turn. The left one bent at an angle that wasn't natural, the knee grotesquely swollen beneath torn fabric. Old injury, by the look of it. Days old, maybe longer. The kind of break that, left untreated out here, meant infection. Gangrene. Death. Her good eye opened, just a crack, just enough to focus on his face. "Help," she whispered. The word came out broken, barely audible. Darian had spent 3 years avoiding exactly this kind of choice. 3 years building walls that kept other people's suffering at a safe distance. He'd buried compassion alongside his family, told himself it was necessary armor, told himself he'd earned the right to indifference. But something in that eye, that single, desperate, defiant eye, cut through every defense he'd constructed. "God damn it," he muttered. He shrugged out of his heavy coat and draped it over her. She was shaking violently now, shock and hypothermia taking hold. He needed to get her warm, get her to shelter, get that leg stabilized before the damage became irreversible, assuming it wasn't already. "I'm going to pick you up," he said. "It's going to hurt like hell." She managed the smallest nod. Darian slid one arm beneath her shoulders, the other under her knees, careful, so careful with that ruined leg, and lifted. She made a sound that wasn't quite a scream, more like air being forced from lungs that had nothing left to give. Her fingers clutched at his shirt, and he felt how cold she was through the fabric. Too cold. Getting her onto Ash was a nightmare. The mare stood steady, bless her, while Darian maneuvered the woman into the saddle, then swung up behind her, holding her against his chest. She sagged into him, and he could feel every shudder that racked her body. "Stay with me," he said. "You hear? Stay with me." The ride back to his ranch took 40 minutes that felt like hours. Darian's property sat in a high valley ringed by timber, a decent-sized operation by frontier standards. The main house was rough-hewn logs chinked with clay, with a stone chimney and a covered porch that faced east toward the sunrise. Behind it stood a barn, a smokehouse, and a couple of smaller outbuildings. Not much to look at, but solid, built to last. He carried her inside, kicked the door shut against the wind, and laid her on his bed, the only bed, since he'd been sleeping in the main room anyway, closer to the fire. She was barely conscious now, mumbling incoherently, skin clammy and pale. Darian lit every lamp he had and built up the fire until the room glowed with heat. Then he started the ugly work of assessment. The leg was definitely broken, both tibia and fibula by his guess, and there was infection starting around the knee. The rest of her was a catalog of violence: cracked ribs, deep bruising across her torso and back, defensive wounds on her hands and forearms. Someone had beaten her severely, then left her to die. "Who did this to you?" he asked, not expecting an answer. Her good eye cracked open again. "Brant," she whispered. "Silas Brant." The name meant nothing to Darian. He'd made a point of not knowing the politics and power structures of the frontier territories. That kind of knowledge led to entanglements, and entanglements got you killed. "Don't talk," he said. "Save your strength." He had medical supplies, nothing sophisticated, but enough to deal with the usual ranch injuries: carbolic acid for disinfection, bandages, laudanum for pain, whiskey for everything else. He worked methodically, cleaning wounds, wrapping ribs, trying to ignore the way she bit back screams when he straightened that leg and splinted it with wood from a broken chair. By the time he finished, she'd passed out again, which was probably a mercy. Darian collapsed into the chair beside the bed, exhausted and covered in her blood. Outside, full dark had fallen, and the wind screamed around the house like something trying to get in. He should have left her. The thought came unbidden, but insistent. Out here, you survived by making hard choices, by knowing when to cut losses, by understanding that saving one person could get you killed trying. He'd learned that lesson watching Sarah waste away, watching the kids follow her into the ground one by one while he stood helpless. But he hadn't left her. Darian rubbed his face, feeling the scrape of several days' stubble. The woman, he didn't even know her name, breathed shallow and uneven in his bed. Every medical instinct he had said she was balanced on the edge of death, and the slightest wrong move would tip her over. "You better not die," he told her unconscious form. "You better not make me regret this." She didn't answer, of course. The next 3 days existed in a blur of fever and crisis. The infection in her leg exploded despite the carbolic acid, turning the skin angry red and hot to the touch. Darian had faced this before with injured cattle, the choice between aggressive treatment and amputation. With cattle, the decision was economic. With a human being, it was something else entirely. He drained the wound, packed it with poultices made from plants Sarah had taught him to identify, and prayed to a god he'd stopped believing in. The woman thrashed and screamed, lost in fever dreams that seemed to involve fire and screaming and names Darian didn't recognize. "Anna!" she called out. "Anna, run! Thomas, get Anna out!" Children's names, Darian thought. Family. On the third night, the fever broke. Darian woke in the chair to find her staring at him, both eyes open now. The swelling had gone down enough to reveal irises the color of winter sky. She studied him with an expression he couldn't read, something between suspicion and wonder. "You're awake," he said, stating the obvious. "Where am I?" Her voice was rough, damaged. Darian fetched water and helped her drink, supporting her head. She managed a few swallows before pulling away. "My ranch," he said, "about 40 miles north of Bridger's Crossing. Found you in a ravine 3 days ago, half frozen and beaten to hell." She processed this information slowly, gaze traveling around the room, taking in the rough furniture, the stone fireplace, the bearskin rug on the floor. Looking for threats, Darian realized. Looking for exits. "What's your name?" he asked. She hesitated long enough that he thought she might not answer. Then, "Celine. Celine Merrick." "Darian Voss," he paused. "Who's Silas Brant?" The reaction was immediate. Celine's entire body went rigid, fear and rage flashing across her face in equal measure. Her hands clenched into fists despite the obvious pain it caused. "Don't," she said. "Don't say that name." "You said it when I found you. Said Brant like it meant something." Celine closed her eyes, and for a moment Darian thought she might retreat back into unconsciousness. But when she opened them again, there was something hard and cold in her expression, something that reminded him of metal cooling after the forge. "He's a cattle lord," she said, "runs most of the territory between here and Crescent Valley. Rich, connected, owns the law and half the people in it. And he killed my family." The words came out flat, matter of fact. "Burned our homestead with them inside. My husband, my daughter, my son. Because we found out things we weren't supposed to know." Darian sat back, processing. The frontier was full of stories like this, powerful men crushing anyone who threatened their interests. He'd heard enough of them to know how they ended, with graves and silence. "What things?" he asked. Celine's laugh was bitter. "Cattle theft, land fraud, murder dressed up as frontier justice. Brant's been building his empire on other people's property for 15 years, and anyone who figures it out," she gestured weakly at her broken body, "this is what happens." "How'd you survive?"
"Luck. Stupidity. I was in the barn when they came. Heard the screaming, tried to get to the house, but one of Brant's men," her voice cracked. "He caught me, beat me, shot my horse out from under me when I tried to run, left me in the wilderness to die slow." The room fell silent except for the crackle of the fire.
Darian had made a career out of not asking questions, not getting involved, not caring about the injustices that unfolded in the territories beyond his property line. But sitting here, listening to Celine Merrick describe the murder of her family with that terrible, empty calm, something shifted in him. "You said Brant's name when I found you," he said quietly. "Were you warning me or promising him something?" Celine met his eyes, and Darian saw the answer before she spoke. "Both." "Bon?" Recovery was not a straight line. There were good days when Celine could sit up, take broth, manage a few hours of consciousness without the laudanum. There were bad days when the pain overwhelmed her and she retreated into silence so absolute that Darian checked her pulse to make sure she was still alive. The leg was the worst of it. Even after the infection cleared, the damage remained. The bones had started healing wrong before Darian found her, and there wasn't much he could do about it now. She'd walk again, probably, but with a limp that would never fade. The kind of injury that marked you forever, that told the world you'd survived something terrible. Darian watched her process this reality in stages. Denial first, when she tried to put weight on the leg too early and collapsed. Rage second, when she understood the permanence of it. And finally, a kind of grim acceptance that frightened him more than the rage had. "I can't run anymore," she said one morning, staring at the splinted leg. "Can't ride fast, can't fight worth a damn." "You're alive," Darian offered. "For now." The implication hung between them. Silas Brant was still out there, and men like him didn't leave witnesses. As Celine grew stronger, she began talking, not about the murder, not at first, but about the life before it. Her husband Thomas had been a surveyor skilled with maps and mathematics. They'd moved to the frontier 5 years ago, drawn by cheap land and the promise of independence. Anna and little Thomas Jr. had been born out here, grew up knowing more about wildlife than cities. Anna was 7, Celine said one evening, staring into the fire. She could identify every bird in the valley by call, made up songs about them, drove her brother crazy. How old was he? 5. He followed Thomas everywhere, wanted to be a surveyor just like his father. She paused. He had my eyes. Darian didn't ask what happened next. He'd heard enough about the night of the fire and her fever dreams to piece together the horror of it. The flames, the screaming, the locked doors that prevented escape. The kind of deliberate cruelty that required planning. Thomas found the discrepancies first, Celine continued, in the land records. Brant had been filing fraudulent claims for years, using fake identities to grab property, then consolidating it under his name once the previous owners mysteriously disappeared or gave up. We had documentation, proof. Where is it now?
Burned with everything else.
She laughed bitterly. Brant's men were thorough. They didn't just kill my family. They erased them. Erased any evidence they ever existed, any proof of what we'd found. What about other witnesses? Other surveyors? Celine shook her head. Thomas worked alone, kept his findings private until he had enough to go to the territorial governor. He didn't trust the local law because half of them are on Brant's payroll. Smart man. Dead man, Celine corrected. Being smart didn't save him. December arrived with the first heavy snow. Darien had always loved this time of year, the way winter transformed the valley into something pristine and silent, the world reduced to essentials. But this year felt different. This year he had another person to worry about, another mouth to feed, another set of needs that complicated his carefully constructed solitude. Celine was mobile now, using a crutch Darien had fashioned from an old axe handle. She moved through the house with determination, refusing help even when her leg obviously pained her. Stubborn, Darien thought, the kind of stubborn that either saved you or got you killed. She insisted on making herself useful. Against his protests, she took over cooking, a task Darien had been managing with the enthusiasm of a man shoveling manure. Turned out Celine had a gift for it, transforming his usual grim stews into something approaching actual food. She mended his clothes, organized his chaotic supply shelves, and generally brought order to a household that had functioned on bachelor neglect for 3 years. "You don't have to do this," Darien told her one evening, watching her wrestle with his ancient sewing kit. "Yes, I do," she replied without looking up. "I'm not a charity case." "Didn't say you were." "You're thinking it." Darien started to argue, then realized she was probably right. There was charity in what he'd done, pulling her from that ravine, nursing her back from death's edge, giving her shelter. But there was something else too, something he was less comfortable acknowledging. He liked having her here, not in any romantic sense, at least he told himself it wasn't romantic, but her presence filled spaces in the house that had been empty too long. The sound of another voice, the smell of bread baking, the simple knowledge that when he woke in the morning, he wouldn't be alone. It was dangerous, that feeling. Attachment led to loss, and Darien had already lost more than he could afford. But Celine Merrick had a way of slipping past defenses, of making him remember what it felt like to care about someone else's survival. "Tell me about your family," Celine said one night. They were sitting by the fire, Darien in his chair, Celine on the floor with her bad legs stretched out. Outside, wind howled through the pines, driving snow against the windows. Darien didn't want to talk about Sarah and the kids, didn't want to excavate those memories. But Celine had shared her horror with him, and refusing felt like cowardice. "Wife was named Sarah," he said slowly. "We met in Missouri, got married young, too young probably. Came west looking for the same thing everyone does, new start, better life, all that nonsense. How'd she die? Consumption. Started with a cough, spread to the kids. Doctor from Bridger's Crossing said there was nothing to be done except keep them comfortable." He stared at the fire. "Watched them waste away over 6 months. Sarah went last. Held on until she knew the kids were gone, then just let go." "I'm sorry." 4 years ago come spring. Feels longer sometimes. Feels like yesterday others. Celine was quiet for a moment, then, "You could have left me in that ravine. Nobody would have blamed you." "Probably." "Why didn't you?" Darien considered the question. He'd been asking himself the same thing for weeks now, looking for a rational answer that didn't exist. "Don't know," he admitted finally. "Guess I'm not as dead inside as I thought." Celine smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her. It transformed her face, softening the hard edges that trauma had carved into her features. "Good," she said. "Dead's no way to live." Winter deepened, and with it came a kind of peace Darien hadn't known in years. The ranch demanded work, even in the cold. Cattle needed feeding, fences needed mending, firewood needed chopping. Celine helped where she could, though her leg limited her mobility. She had a sharp mind for problem solving, often suggesting improvements to Darien's systems that he'd never considered. "You're running this place like a man who expects to do everything himself," she observed one afternoon, watching him struggle to repair a water pump. "That's because I do everything myself." "That's stupid. You could rig a better system with pulleys and leverage. Work smarter instead of harder." She was right, of course. Darien had fallen into patterns of brute force and exhaustion, never stopping to think there might be better ways. With Celine's input, they redesigned several of his operations, making the ranch more efficient and less soul-crushing. Working together created its own intimacy. They developed rhythms, unspoken understandings. Darien learned that Celine liked her coffee strong enough to strip paint and hated beans for breakfast. Celine learned that Darien went silent when worried and talked too much when nervous. They orbited each other in the small space of the house, finding ways to coexist that felt natural despite the circumstances. and slowly, carefully, something shifted between them. It started with small things. Darian's hand on Celine's back as she navigated icy steps. Celine's fingers brushing his when she handed him a cup. Glances that lasted a moment too long. The kind of awareness that built slowly, like snow accumulating on branches until the weight became undeniable. Neither of them spoke about it. There was too much damage between them, too much grief and trauma and unfinished business. Darian was still mourning his family, still carrying guilt about survival. Celine was nursing rage that had no outlet, trapped in a broken body on a remote ranch while the man who murdered her children walked free. But late at night, when the fire burned low and the wind screamed outside, Darian sometimes caught Celine watching him with an expression that made his chest tight. "What?" he'd ask.
"Nothing," she'd reply. "Just thank you for not leaving me to die. You already thanked me. Doesn't mean I'm done being grateful." January brought a thaw, brief but significant. The snow melted enough to clear the pass to Bridger's Crossing, and Darian knew he needed to make a supply run before the next storm hit. He'd been putting it off, reluctant to leave Celine alone, but they were running low on essentials.
"I'm coming with you," Celine announced the night before he planned to leave. "Like hell you are. I'm not staying here alone. Your leg?" "My leg is fine for riding. I've been practicing." She had been too, teaching herself to mount Ash despite the injury, building strength and balance. Darian wanted to argue, but he recognized the look in her eyes. She was terrified of being left behind, of being vulnerable and alone again. And maybe, under that fear, there was something else, a need to reclaim agency, to prove she wasn't helpless. "Fine," he said, "but we're taking it slow, and if you're in pain, we stop." "Deal." They rode out at dawn, Darian on Ash and Celine on his backup horse, a roan gelding named Red. The journey to Bridger's Crossing took most of the day, winding through mountain passes and across frozen streams. Celine managed better than Darian expected, though he could see the effort it cost her. Bridger's Crossing was a frontier town in the truest sense, a collection of rough buildings clustered around a trading post with a saloon, a blacksmith, and not much else. The kind of place where strangers were noted and news traveled fast. They hitched the horses outside the trading post, and Darian immediately felt the weight of eyes on them. Frontier towns existed on gossip, and a wounded woman with Darian Voss, the hermit rancher who never brought anyone to town, was prime material. Inside, the proprietor, a heavy-set man named Carlson, raised his eyebrows. "Darian, been a while." "Carlson," Darian handed over his list. "Need supplies. Can you have it ready by morning?" "Sure thing." Carlson's gaze drifted to Celine, curiosity naked on his face. "Ma'am." Celine nodded but didn't speak. Darian could feel her tension, the way she positioned herself to watch the door, to track everyone in the room. They finished the transaction quickly and headed for the saloon, not to drink, but because it was the only place to get a hot meal that wasn't jerky. The building was dim and smoky, crowded with ranchers and drifters escaping the cold. Darian found a corner table while Celine limped to the bar for food. He watched her go, noting the way men's eyes followed her, not with desire, but with assessment. A woman alone was unusual enough. A woman with obvious injuries was a story waiting to be told. "That Darian Voss?" The voice came from a nearby table. Darian glanced over to see three men in dusty range clothes, cups of whiskey in front of them. One of them, a lean fellow with a scar across his cheek, was staring at Celine. "Yeah," another replied. "Hermit from up north. Lost his family a few years back." "Who's the woman?" "Don't know. Never seen her before." Darian's instinct screamed warning, but he forced himself to stay calm. Just frontier curiosity, nothing more. Then Celine returned with 2 plates of stew, and everything went to hell. She'd barely sat down when the scarred man stood and walked over, his companions following. Up close, Darian could see he was young, mid-20s maybe, with the kind of arrogant confidence that came from never being told no. "Excuse me, ma'am," the man said, "but do I know you?" Celine's face went carefully blank. "No? You sure? Because you look awful familiar." "I'm sure." "Where you from?" Darian stood, positioning himself between Celine and the stranger. "She said no, back off." The scarred man's eyes flicked to Darian, then back to Celine. Something clicked in his expression, recognition, maybe, or suspicion. "You're one of Brant's men," Celine said quietly. The words fell into the saloon like stones into still water. The scarred man smiled. Might be. And you might be someone Mr. Brandt's been looking for. The room had gone silent, every ear tuned to the confrontation. Darian's hand moved instinctively toward his belt, where he kept a knife. The scarred man noticed and laughed. Easy, friend. Nobody needs to get hurt. We're just having a conversation. Conversation's over, Darian said. Tell you what, the man continued, ignoring him. Why don't you come with us, ma'am? Mr. Brandt would very much like to know you survived. He'll be pleased to hear it. I'm not going anywhere with you.
Didn't really phrase it as a question. Darian moved fast, faster than he'd moved in years, stepping forward and driving his fist into the scarred man's gut. The man doubled over with a grunt, and chaos erupted. The other two men jumped in, and suddenly Darian was fighting all three of them while Celine scrambled back, her bad leg buckling. Someone threw a chair. Glass shattered. The bartender was shouting something about the sheriff. Darian took a punch to the jaw that sent stars across his vision, but he stayed on his feet, driven by pure adrenaline and the knowledge that if they took Celine, she was dead. Then a gunshot cracked through the saloon, impossibly loud in the enclosed space. Everyone froze. Celine stood by the wall, Darian's pistol. When had she taken his pistol, aimed at the ceiling? Smoke curled from the barrel. Next one goes lower, she said calmly. The scarred man straightened, wiping blood from his mouth. His eyes were cold now, all pretense of friendliness gone. You're making a mistake, he told her. Brandt owns this territory. You can't hide from him. I'm not hiding, Celine replied. Tell your boss that Celine Merrick is alive. Tell him I'm coming for him. The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. The scarred man studied her for a long moment, then smiled, a cruel, knowing smile that promised retribution. He gestured to his companions, and they backed toward the door, never taking their eyes off Celine and the gun. See you soon, Mrs. Merrick, he called as they left. The saloon remained frozen for another heartbeat, then exploded into excited chatter. Darian grabbed Celine's arm, gently but firmly, and pulled her toward the exit. We need to leave, now. They made it to their horses without incident, though Darian could feel eyes following them from every window. He helped Celine mount, then swung onto Ash, and they rode out of Bridger's Crossing at a pace just short of panic. They didn't stop until they were miles out of town, until the lights had disappeared behind them, and there was nothing but darkness and the sound of hooves on frozen ground. Only then did Darian pull up, his heart still hammering. What the hell were you thinking? He demanded. Telling him your name? Threatening Brandt? Celine's face was pale in the moonlight, but her eyes burned with something fierce and terrible. I'm done hiding, she said. I'm done being afraid. Brandt thinks he killed me, thinks he erased me. But I'm still here, and I'm going to make sure everyone knows what he did. That's suicide. Maybe. She met his gaze steadily. But it's my choice. My life. And I'm not going to spend what's left of it running. Darian wanted to argue, wanted to shake sense into her, wanted to tell her that vengeance was a fool's game that only ended one way. But looking at Celine Merrick, broken, furious, alive, he knew argument was pointless. She'd made her decision, and somehow, without quite meaning to, Darian had made his too. Then I guess we'd better figure out a plan, he said quietly. Celine smiled, a wild, reckless smile that should have terrified him. Yeah, she said. I guess we better. They rode home through the winter darkness, and behind them, word was already spreading. The woman Silas Brandt tried to bury had risen from the grave, and she was coming for him. The frontier would never be the same. The ride back to the ranch felt twice as long as the journey out. Darian kept checking over his shoulder, expecting to see riders coming after them through the darkness. But the trail remained empty except for their own tracks in the snow, and eventually the adrenaline began to fade, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion that made his hands shake on the reins. Celine rode in silence beside him, her face set in an expression he was starting to recognize, that look of someone who'd made a decision they couldn't unmake and was now living with the consequences in real time. You understand what you just did, Darian said finally. It wasn't a question. I know exactly what I did. Those men will report to Brandt. He'll know you're alive, know where you are, know you threatened him in front of witnesses. Good. Darian twisted in his saddle to look at her properly. Good?
Celine, you just painted a target on yourself, on both of us.
The target was already there. Her voice was calm, matter of fact. I was always going to go after him. The only question was whether I'd do it smart or stupid. Tonight I chose smart. How the hell is provoking him smart?
Because now he knows I'm coming. Now he has to worry, has to wonder what I'm planning, what evidence I might have, who I might tell.
She met his eyes. Fear is a weapon, Darian,
and I just put it in his hands to use on himself. Darian wanted to argue, but he could see the logic even if he hated it. Brant had thought Celine was dead, thought he'd eliminated the problem. Now he'd discovered not only that she'd survived, but that she was angry and unafraid. That kind of uncertainty could make a powerful man reckless. And what about the part where he sends every hired gun in the territory to kill you? Then we'd better be ready. They reached the ranch just before midnight, both of them cold and sore and running on fumes. Darian tended the horses while Celine limped inside to build up the fire. By the time he joined her, she'd stripped off her coat and was standing by the hearth, warming her hands. "I'm sorry," she said without turning around. Darian hung his gun belt on its peg. "For what?" "For dragging you into this. You saved my life, gave me shelter, and I repaid you by starting a war on your doorstep. You didn't start anything. Brant did when he murdered your family. But you could have stayed out of it, should have stayed out of it." She turned to face him, and in the firelight her eyes looked tired and very old. "You still can. Give me a horse and some supplies, and I'll leave in the morning. You can tell anyone who asks that I ran off, that you don't know where I went." "You really think I'm the kind of man who'd do that?" "I think you're the kind of man who already buried one family. I don't want to be the reason you bury yourself too." Darian crossed the room slowly, stopping a few feet away from her, close enough to see the fear beneath her defiance, the exhaustion beneath her strength. "I made my choice when I pulled you out of that ravine," he said. "Made it again every day I kept you alive. You think I don't know what that means? I've been on this frontier long enough to understand how debts and obligations work. This isn't your fight. It is now." They stood there in the firelight, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of what they were walking into together. Not love, not yet, but something deeper and more dangerous. Partnership. Alliance. The kind of bond forged between people who'd seen each other at their worst and chosen to stand anyway. "So what's the plan?" Darian asked. Celine's smile was sharp as broken glass. "We make me dangerous." The next morning, Darian started teaching Celine to fight. Not the way he would have taught someone whole and healthy. That kind of instruction assumed mobility, speed, power that Celine's broken leg had stolen. Instead, he taught her to fight dirty, to compensate, to turn her limitations into unexpected advantages. "Out here, nobody fights fair," he told her in the barn, where they'd cleared space for practice. "Fair gets you killed. You need to think like someone who's already lost, already beaten, already dead. Then you fight from there." Cheerful philosophy. Kept me alive. He showed her how to use her crutch as a weapon, the leverage you could get striking upward, the weak points on a human body where a solid hit would drop someone regardless of size, how to position herself so her bad leg became an asset rather than a liability, how to make opponents underestimate her and pay for it. Celine learned fast, driven by a fury that made her ruthless. When Darian corrected her stance, she adjusted immediately. When he demonstrated a technique, she replicated it with precision that bordered on obsessive. She pushed herself until sweat soaked through her clothes and her legs shook from strain, and when Darian tried to call a halt, she refused. "Again," she'd say. "You need to rest." Again. It was like watching someone forge themselves into a weapon through sheer force of will. But it wasn't enough, and they both knew it. Even at her best, Celine couldn't match a trained fighter in close combat. Her leg would always be a weak point, always make her slower, more vulnerable. They needed to even the odds. "You need to learn to shoot," Darian said one afternoon. Celine looked up from where she'd been cleaning the kitchen rifle. "I know how to shoot. Thomas taught me." Knowing and being good are different things. "How much practice you have?" "Enough to hit a target at 20 yards. "That's not enough. Not for this." Darian pulled his pistol from its holster, checked the chamber, and held it out to her. "You're going to learn to shoot like someone who expects to be shot at. They spent the next week in daily practice sessions that left Celine's ears ringing and her shoulder bruised from recoil. Darian set up targets at varying distances, taught her to shoot from different positions, to compensate for wind and elevation, to reload under pressure. Don't aim, he told her. Point. Aiming takes too long when someone's trying to kill you. You point like you're pointing your finger and you trust your instincts. That sounds insane. It works. And it did, though it took dozens of rounds before Celine began to understand what he meant. There was a rhythm to it, a kind of muscle memory that bypassed conscious thought. Point, fire, adjust. Point, fire, adjust. Over and over, until her hands knew the weight of the weapon better than her brain did. By the end of the week, she could hit a man-sized target at 50 yards more often than not. Better, Darian said, watching her punch holes through a wooden board. But you're still thinking too much. Need to make it automatic. How long did it take you? To get good? Couple years? To get good enough to stay alive? He shrugged. About 3 weeks after I arrived on the frontier. Celine laughed, a real laugh. Not the bitter thing she usually produced. Motivating. But beneath the training and the preparation, tension was building like a storm gathering force. Every day they didn't see riders from Brant's organization was another day of waiting for the axe to fall. Darian found himself sleeping lighter, waking at every unfamiliar sound. He checked the approaches to the ranch obsessively, looking for signs of surveillance or approach. Celine was worse. She'd pace the house at night when she thought Darian was asleep, her crutch thumping against the floorboards in irregular rhythm. Sometimes he'd find her standing at the window, staring out into the darkness like she could see enemies gathering in the shadows. Can't sleep? He asked one night, joining her at the window. Keep thinking about Anna. Selena's voice was distant. She was afraid of the dark. Used to make Thomas check under her bed for monsters every night before she'd settle. There weren't any monsters under her bed. No, they came through the front door instead. Darian had learned there was nothing useful to say to grief like that. Words cheapened it, made it smaller than it was, so he just stood beside her in the darkness, sharing the weight of it. Thomas was a good man, Celine said after a while. Patient, kind, everything you're supposed to be as a husband and father. But he wasn't built for violence. When Brant's men came, he tried to reason with them, tried to negotiate. Her laugh was hollow. They shot him first, made him watch the house burn before they finished him. You saw it? Heard it. I was in the barn when the shooting started. By the time I understood what was happening, the house was already on fire. I tried. Her voice cracked. I ran toward it, toward the screaming, and that's when one of them caught me. She touched her leg unconsciously, fingers tracing the shape of old injury through her skirt. He beat me until I couldn't stand. Then he put his gun to my head and I thought that was it. Thought at least I'd be with them. She paused. But he didn't shoot. Said Brant wanted me to suffer, wanted me to die slow in the wilderness like an animal. So he took my horse, took my supplies, and left me there in the dark with my family burning. How'd you make it as far as you did? Rage. Pure, stupid rage. I crawled for 2 days before the leg got so bad I couldn't move anymore. Then I just waited. Waited to die or be saved, whichever came first. She turned to look at Darian, and her eyes were dry and hard. You were the first person to show me kindness in so long. And now I'm going to get you killed, and there's a part of me that hates myself for it. But there's a bigger part that doesn't care, because nothing matters except making Brant pay for what he did. That's the rage talking. No, that's clarity. For the first time in months, I know exactly what I need to do. Darian wanted to argue, wanted to tell her that revenge was poison, that it would consume her faster than any injury. But he'd seen enough of the frontier to know that sometimes revenge was the only justice available. Sometimes the system was too corrupt, too broken, too bought to deliver anything resembling fairness. So we make him pay, Darian said. But we do it smart. We do it in a way that doesn't just get you killed for nothing. What did you have in mind? Information first. Can't fight what we don't understand. Need to know how big Brant's operation is, who's loyal to him, where his weaknesses are. And how do we get that without tipping our hand? Carefully. Over the next few weeks, Darian made trips to surrounding settlements. Not Bridger's Crossing, but smaller outposts where news traveled differently. He posed as a rancher looking to expand, asked casual questions about land prices and water rights, listened to the gossip that frontier folk traded like currency. What he learned painted a picture darker than he'd expected. Silas Brant wasn't just a cattle lord, he was an empire. His holdings stretched across 3 territories, built on a foundation of fraud, intimidation, and strategic violence. He owned the largest ranch operation in the region, controlled water access for dozens of smaller homesteads, and had enough hired guns on his payroll to equip a small army. But more than that, he'd bought legitimacy. The territorial marshal was in his pocket. Half the judges owed him favors or money. Even the land office had been compromised, with clerks who'd falsify documents for the right price. Thomas Merrick hadn't just stumbled onto evidence of fraud, he'd uncovered a criminal conspiracy that reached into every level of frontier government. "He's untouchable," Darian told Celine one evening, spreading out the notes he'd compiled. "At least through legal channels. You could have a signed confession from Brant himself, and it wouldn't matter. The people who'd need to prosecute him are the same people he owns." Celine studied the notes with the intensity of someone reading a battle plan. "Then we don't use legal channels." "What are you suggesting?" "Brant's power comes from fear and reputation. Everyone knows he's dangerous, knows he'll destroy anyone who crosses him. That's why people cooperate, why they look the other way." She tapped the papers. "But what happens when that reputation starts to crack? When people see him as weak instead of strong?" "You want to humiliate him. I want to dismantle him piece by piece, show everyone in the territory that Silas Brant is just a man, and men can bleed." It was ambitious, reckless, probably suicidal. It was also the first plan Darian had heard that didn't end with Celine dead in a ditch. "How?" he asked. Celine's smile was cold and calculating. "We start with his men, the ones who killed my family. We make examples of them." "You mean kill them?" "I mean expose them. Make them confess publicly what they did. Force Brant to either defend murderers or abandon his own people." She met his eyes. "Death is too easy. I want them to live with what they did." Over the following month, they laid the groundwork for something that was part vengeance, part insurgency, part performance art. Darian used his supply runs to identify Brant's key operatives, the men who did his dirty work, enforced his will, carried out his violence. Celine cross-referenced them against her memories of the attack, picking out the ones she recognized. The scarred man from Bridger's Crossing was named Hayes. He'd been the one to beat Celine, the one who'd left her to die. There was a thick-necked brute called Carver, who ran protection rackets in the smaller settlements, collecting taxes from homesteaders who couldn't afford to refuse. A quiet, methodical killer named Pike, who specialized in making problems disappear, usually with a bullet from long range. And a dozen others, each with their own specialty, each contributing to Brant's empire of fear. "We can't take them all at once," Darian said. "No, but we can take them one at a time, make each one a message." They started small. Carver had a route he traveled every 2 weeks, collecting from homesteads in the valley east of Bridger's Crossing. Darian and Celine tracked his movements for 3 cycles, learning his patterns, identifying the point where he was most vulnerable. On a cold morning in late February, they intercepted him on a lonely stretch of trail. Carver saw them coming, hard to miss 2 riders on an empty road, but he didn't seem concerned. He was a big man, confident in his size and the reputation of the organization behind him. He reined in his horse and waited, one hand resting casually on his gun. "Help you folks?" he called out. Darian and Celine stopped about 20 yards away, close enough to talk, far enough to react if things went wrong. "Recognize me?" Celine asked. Carver squinted at her, then shook his head. "Should I? Probably not. You weren't there the night Brant's men burned the Merrick homestead, but you work for the man who gave the order." Understanding dawned slowly across Carver's face, followed by wariness. His hand tightened on his gun. "That's Brant's business, not mine. It became your business when you started collecting money to fund his operation. Look, lady, I don't know what you think you're going to accomplish here, but..." He went for his gun. Celine was faster. The pistol seemed to appear in her hand, and she put a round into the ground 2 feet in front of Carver's horse. The animal reared, screaming, and Carver fought to stay in the saddle while Darian closed the distance and yanked him off the horse entirely. They hit the ground hard, Carver trying to bring his weapon around, Darian jamming his knee into the bigger man's chest and twisting the gun free. Within seconds, it was over. Carver disarmed, face down in the frozen dirt, Darian's knee in his back and Celine's gun trained on his head. "Don't move," Darian said. Carver struggled anyway, until Celine fired another round into the ground next to his ear. The crack of it so close made him go still. "Smart," Celine said. "Now we're going to have a conversation, and you're going to tell me exactly what you know about Silas Brandt's operations." "Go to hell!" Celine nodded at Darian, who shifted his weight, driving his knee harder into Carver's spine. The big man grunted in pain. "Wrong answer," Celine said. Let's try again. How many people work for Brandt?" Silence. Darian pulled Carver's arm back at an angle that made the shoulder joint creak. Not dislocated yet, but close. 50, Carver gasped. Maybe 60. I don't know exact numbers. "How many killers? How many like Hayes and Pike?" "Dozen, maybe more. He brings them in from outside when he needs them." "What's he paying you?" "Percentage of what I collect, plus room and board at his ranch." Celine crouched down, getting her face close to Carver's. "Do you know what he did to my family?" "I heard things." "What things?" "That there was a fire, that some surveyor and his family died. He locked them in their house and burned them alive. 2 children and a man who'd never hurt anyone in his life. You're collecting money to pay for that. How does that sit with you?" For the first time, something that might have been shame crossed Carver's face. "I just do what I'm told." "That's what everyone says." Celine stood up, wincing as her bad leg protested the movement. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to ride back to Brandt's ranch, and you're going to tell him that Celine Merrick is coming for everyone who had a hand in killing her family. Tell him she's done hiding, done running, and done being afraid. He'll kill me for losing to you. Then I guess you'd better hope he's feeling merciful. Because if I see you again, if I hear you're still collecting for him, I won't be." They let him go, bruised, humiliated, but alive. Carver scrambled for his horse and rode off without looking back, and Darian and Celine watched him disappear down the trail. "Think he'll deliver the message?" Darian asked. "He'll deliver it. Question is what Brandt does with it." What Brandt did was escalate. Within a week, word came back through the frontier grapevine that Brandt had put a price on Celine's head. $500 for proof of her death, $1,000 for bringing her in alive. It was enough money to tempt every desperate bounty hunter and opportunistic drifter in 3 territories. "Congratulations," Darian said, reading the notice someone had posted in the Bridgers Crossing trading post. "You're officially worth killing." "Only 1,000? Celine smiled grimly. "I expected more." But the bounty changed the equation in ways neither of them had fully anticipated. Suddenly, they couldn't move through settlements without drawing attention, couldn't trust strangers, couldn't assume that anyone they met wasn't measuring them for the reward. The ranch became a fortress. Darian reinforced the doors, set up sight lines that covered all approaches, cached weapons in strategic locations. He taught Celine to shoot from the windows, to identify threats before they got close, to think like someone under siege. Because that's what they were now. 2 people alone against an organization with resources, manpower, and the explicit backing of territorial power. "This is insane," Darian said one night. "We can't hold off a real assault, not if Brandt sends everyone he's got." "Then we make sure he doesn't feel safe sending everyone. Make sure he has to worry about what we'll do while his forces are away." Guerrilla tactics. Exactly. They hit Brandt's operations where they were vulnerable. Supply lines, isolated outposts, places where his men felt safe because they'd always been safe. Each strike was calculated to cause maximum disruption with minimum risk. They burned a warehouse full of fraudulent land documents that Brandt had been using to legitimize his claims. They intercepted a payment convoy heading to bribed officials, scattering the money across the countryside for homesteaders to find. They left messages, written in Celine's hand, detailing what Brandt had done, who he'd killed, how his empire was built on blood and lies. Each action spread her name further across the frontier. Some people dismissed her as a lunatic. Others began to wonder if maybe she was telling the truth. And a few, the ones who'd lost land or family or hope to Brandt's machine, began to see her as something else entirely. A symbol. A rebellion. Proof that even the most powerful predator could be hunted. But symbols had a way of attracting violence. It happened on a night in early March, when winter was loosening its grip but hadn't fully let go. Darian was in the barn, checking on a cow that looked ready to calve when he heard the shot. The sound punched through the evening stillness like a declaration. Darian ran for the house, drawing his pistol as he moved, his mind already cataloging possibilities. Bounty hunters, Brant's men, someone who'd tracked them here. He burst through the door to find Celine crouched by the window, rifle in hand, blood on her face. "Are you hit?" he demanded. "No, ricochet from the glass." Darian doused the lamps, plunging the house into darkness, except for the dying glow of the fire. "How many?" "3 that I saw, maybe more in the tree line." Another shot slammed into the wall, the impact loud enough to make them both flinch. Professional work. Whoever was out there knew how to shoot. Darian moved to the opposite window, trying to get an angle on the shooters. The moon was nearly full, turning the snow-covered yard into a study in silver and shadow. He caught movement near the barn, someone using it for cover. "There," he said, pointing. Celine shifted, brought the rifle up, and fired. The shot lit up the darkness for a heartbeat, and Darian saw a figure dive for better cover. The next 10 minutes were chaos. Shots exchanged, shadows moving, the smell of gun smoke thick in the confined space. Darian's training from years ago came back in muscle memory. The mathematics of angles and exposure times. The patience of waiting for a clean shot versus the urgency of suppressing fire. Celine fought beside him with a focus that was almost frightening. Her bad leg didn't slow her reload speed, didn't affect her aim. She'd become exactly what she'd set out to be, dangerous. Then someone tried the door. Darian heard the scrape of boots on the porch, saw the handle start to turn. He put 3 rounds through the wood at chest height, heard a cry of pain, heard someone fall. Silence followed, broken only by heavy breathing. "Think they're gone?" Celine asked. "Only one way to find out." Darian grabbed a lamp and lobbed it through the window, not lit, just thrown to draw fire. Nothing happened. He waited another minute, then carefully opened the door. The man on the porch was still breathing, but barely. Young, maybe 25, with the hard eyes of someone who'd seen violence, but not enough to know when to quit. His shirt was soaked with blood, and when he saw Darian, he tried to reach for his gun. Darian kicked it away. "Who sent you?" The man coughed, red bubbling at his lips. "Brant said you were easy money. He was wrong. Looks like." Celine appeared in the doorway, rifle still in hand. She looked down at the dying man without expression. "What's your name?" she asked. "Why do you care?" "Because I want to know who I'm killing." The man's laugh turned into a wet cough. "Miller, James Miller, and you're not killing me. Already did that yourself." "Any family?" "Brother, up in Silverton." His eyes found Celine's, and for a moment something almost human showed through the mercenary's mask. Tell him I'm sorry." He died before she could respond. Darian and Celine stood there in the darkness, looking at the body, at the blood soaking into the porch wood. Behind them, the house was shot to hell, windows broken, walls pockmarked, furniture splintered. "This is what we're fighting," Celine said quietly. "Young men who don't know any better, who think killing for money is just business." "You having second thoughts?" "No, but I'm starting to understand the cost." She looked at Darian. "You're bleeding." He was too, a graze across his ribs from a bullet he hadn't even felt hit. Nothing serious, but it brought home how close they'd come to dying tonight. "We need to move," Darian said. "They found us here, others will too. This place isn't safe anymore." "Where do we go?" "Deeper. Into the mountains, where Brant's influence doesn't reach as far. There are places up there, old mining camps, abandoned settlements. We can use them as bases, keep moving, stay ahead of whatever he sends." Celine nodded slowly. Guerrilla warfare. For real this time. For real. They spent what was left of the night gathering supplies, packing what they could carry, preparing to abandon the only sanctuary they'd known. Darian found himself looking at the house with something like grief. This place had been his refuge after Sarah died, his fortress against the world. Now it was just another casualty of the war Celine had started. But when he looked at her, limping through the rooms with determined efficiency, he knew he'd make the same choice again. Some fights mattered more than comfort. Some people were worth the cost. They rode out at first light, leading a pack horse loaded with supplies. Behind them, Darian's ranch sat quiet and damaged in the cold dawn light, windows like broken eyes staring at nothing. The mountains swallowed them within hours, and the real war began. The high country was brutal in ways the valley had never been. Up here, where the trees thinned and rock broke through snow like bones through skin, the cold had teeth that bit deeper than anything Darien remembered. They pushed higher into terrain that tested even Ash's sure-footedness, following game trails that hadn't seen human traffic in years. Celine's leg was failing. She didn't complain, wouldn't give him the satisfaction, but Darien could see it in the way she gripped her saddle. The white-knuckle tension that spoke of pain pushed past endurance. Every jolt of Red's hooves translated directly into her damaged knee, and by the time they made camp that first night, she could barely dismount without help. "Let me see it," Darien said. "It's fine." "Celine!" She relented, rolling up her pant leg to reveal swelling that had turned the skin purple and hot to touch. The cold ride had inflamed old injuries, and Darien knew from experience that ignoring this kind of damage led to permanent loss of function. He packed snow around her knee, wrapped it tight, and dosed her with laudanum she tried to refuse. "We can't afford me being useless," she protested, "and we can't afford you crippling yourself worse. Take the medicine." She did, reluctantly, and within an hour, the pain lines around her eyes had softened. They sat by a fire too small to give real warmth, eating cold rations because smoke would give away their position. "Tell me about the mining camps," Celine said. Her words had the careful precision of someone fighting the laudanum's pull. "Abandoned mostly. Silver played out 15 years ago, and the companies left everything behind. Structures are still standing in some places, cabins, supply sheds, even an old assay office." Darien poked at the fire with a stick. "Could be useful. Shelter without people. Supplies nobody's using." "How many camps?" "5 that I know of. Probably more I don't." "Then we use them. Set up in one, hit Brandt's operations, move to the next before he figures out where we are." It was sound strategy, assuming they could survive the environment long enough to execute it. The high country killed careless people with efficient indifference, hypothermia, falls, avalanches, starvation. Adding armed pursuit to that list just shortened the odds further. But Darien had stopped arguing with Celine's plans. She was going to do this regardless, and at least this way, he could try to keep her alive while she did it. They reached the first camp 2 days later, a collection of rotting structures clinging to a mountainside like the skeleton of some long-dead thing. Most of the buildings had collapsed under snow weight, but one cabin remained intact enough to provide shelter. Inside, they found the remnants of previous occupants: a broken cot, rusted tools, playing cards scattered across a warped table. Evidence of men who'd come here chasing fortune and found only hardship. "Home sweet home," Celine said, limping through the door. They spent the next week fortifying their position and planning their next move. The elevation gave them visibility for miles, and Darien rigged warning systems using rope and tin cans that would alert them to anyone approaching. It was crude, but effective. Celine used the time to heal, though Darien could see frustration eating at her. She wasn't built for waiting, for recovery. She wanted action, wanted to hurt the people who'd hurt her. "Pike," she said one night, studying the rough map they'd drawn of Brandt's territory. "He's the one we go after next." Darien knew the name. Pike was Brandt's long-range specialist, the man who eliminated problems from distances that made witnesses impossible. Quiet, methodical, reportedly the best shot in 3 territories. "He'll be hard to get close to," Darien said. "I'm not planning to get close. I'm planning to make him come to us." "How?" Celine's smile was cold. "We spread a rumor. Say that Thomas hid documents before he died, proof of everything Brandt's done. Say that I know where they are and I'm going to retrieve them. There are no documents. Pike doesn't know that. Brandt doesn't know that. They'll have to assume it's true, have to try to stop me from getting to them. And when Pike shows up to kill you, then we kill him first. Show Brandt that even his best aren't good enough." It was risky, bordering on suicidal. It was also exactly the kind of psychological warfare that might work. Brandt had built his empire on fear and information control. The suggestion that documented proof of his crimes might exist would force his hand. They planted the rumor carefully, using intermediaries who owed Darien favors or had their own grudges against Brandt. Within days, word was spreading through the territories. Celine Merrick was going after evidence that would bring down Silas Brandt, and she'd announced when and where she'd be retrieving it. The location they named was an abandoned homestead in neutral territory, exposed enough to give a sniper clear sightlines, but defensible if you knew what you were doing. Pike arrived 3 days before the announced retrieval date. Darian spotted him first, a distant figure moving through the timber with the patience of someone who understood that rushing got you killed. He was setting up a position, finding angles, preparing to wait however long it took. "He's good," Darian murmured, watching through the crude telescope he'd fashioned from scavenged materials. "Better than you?" Celine asked. "Maybe, but he doesn't know we're watching him watch us." They'd prepared for this, set up their own positions with overlapping fields of fire. The homestead was bait, but the trap extended far beyond it. Darian had spent 2 days studying the terrain, identifying every approach, every sightline, every piece of cover a sniper might use. Pike had chosen well, but not perfectly. On the morning of the supposed retrieval, Celine made her appearance at the homestead. Visible, vulnerable, the perfect target. She moved with exaggerated care, playing the role of someone injured and desperate, someone who didn't know a rifle was trained on her from 600 yards. Darian waited in position, his own rifle steady on a rock that gave him an angle on Pike's hide. The range was extreme, at the edge of what he could reliably hit, but he'd spent the previous night practicing on similar distances. Through the telescope, he saw Pike settle into his shot, saw the minute adjustments, the breath control, the complete focus of a professional at work. Darian fired first. The shot cracked across the valley, and through the scope Darian saw Pike jerk, saw the rifle tumble from his hands. Not a kill shot. Darian had aimed for the shoulder, wanted him alive, but enough to end the threat. He was moving before Pike hit the ground, scrambling down the slope with his rifle ready. Celine was already running from the homestead, her limp pronounced but not stopping her. They reached Pike within minutes. He was still conscious, clutching his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers. His rifle lay 10 feet away where it had fallen. "Don't," Pike said as Darian approached. "Don't come closer." But Darian did, kicking the rifle further away, checking for other weapons. Pike was unarmed now, neutralized, just another wounded man bleeding in the snow. Celine arrived breathing hard, her face flushed with exertion and something that might have been triumph. "You're Pike," she said. The man looked at her with eyes that held more resignation than fear. "Yeah. How many people have you killed for Brandt?" "Enough to know how this goes. You going to lecture me first or just get it over with?" "Neither." Celine crouched down, wincing as her bad leg protested. "I'm going to give you a choice." Pike laughed, the sound wet and pained. "What choice?" "You can die here, quiet and unmourned, just another body in the wilderness. Or you can ride back to the nearest settlement and tell everyone what you did, who you did it for and why." "That's not a choice. That's suicide." "Maybe. But it's suicide where people remember your name, where they know the truth, where maybe, just maybe, you do something decent before you die." Pike stared at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. "You're crazy." "Probably. But I'm also the woman who survived what Brandt tried to do to me, and I'm offering you something he never would. A chance at redemption." "There's no redemption for what I've done." "Then confess anyway. Make it mean something." They left him there with a horse, medical supplies, and a choice. Darian had wanted to finish it, argued that leaving Pike alive was a tactical mistake. But Celine had been immovable. "Dead men don't spread stories," she'd said. "I want Brandt to know that even his killers are turning on him." Whether Pike would actually confess or just disappear was anyone's guess. But 2 weeks later, word filtered back through the frontier grapevine. A man matching Pike's description had staggered into a settlement called Copper Ridge and spent 3 hours detailing murders he'd committed for Silas Brandt before drinking himself to death. The story spread like fire through dry grass. Suddenly, people were talking openly about Brandt's operations, questioning the official explanations for disappearances and accidents. The armor of respectability he'd built was cracking, and beneath it the violence showed through clear and ugly. Brandt's response was predictable and savage. He increased the bounty on Celine to $2,000 and added Darian to the notice for $500. He sent riders through the territories with orders to search every homestead, every camp, every place someone might hide. And he made examples of people suspected of helping the fugitives. Burned barns, stolen cattle, beatings in the night. The frontier was bleeding, and Celine's name was on everyone's lips for good or ill. We're hurting innocent people, Darian said one night, reading a report about a family whose farm had been torched on suspicion of providing supplies. Brant's hurting them, Celine corrected. We're just the excuse. That's a fine distinction. It's the only distinction that matters. We stop, he wins. Everyone he's brutalized, everyone he's killed, it all means nothing if we quit now. But Darian could see the toll it was taking on her, the weight of collateral damage, the knowledge that her quest for justice was creating new victims. She'd grown quieter, more withdrawn, spending hours staring at the map like it might reveal an answer written in the contours. They moved to the second mining camp, then the third, staying ahead of search parties, but never by much. The high country was vast, but it wasn't infinite, and Brant had resources they couldn't match. It was during a supply run to a tiny settlement called Granger's Point that everything changed. Darian had gone alone, leaving Celine at the camp with strict instructions to stay hidden. The settlement was barely a dozen buildings, isolated enough that Brant's influence was thin. He'd traded there before without incident, but this time felt different. The few people on the street watched him with expressions he couldn't read. Not hostile exactly, but knowing, like they recognized him from somewhere, like they'd been expecting him. The trading post owner, a weathered woman named Ruth, confirmed it the moment he walked in. "You're Darian Voss," she said. Not a question. That a problem? Depends. You really traveling with the Merrick woman? Darian considered lying, decided it was pointless. What's it to you? Ruth studied him for a long moment, then gestured him to follow her into the back room. Once the door was closed, she pulled out a folded newspaper from beneath the counter. This came through yesterday, Territorial Press out of Crescent Valley. Darian took the paper and felt his stomach drop. The headline read, "Frontier Justice or Vigilante Terror? The Celine Merrick Controversy." Below it was a long article that laid out the entire story, her family's murder, her survival, her campaign against Brant. But the tone wasn't sympathetic. It painted her as a dangerous radical, a woman driven mad by grief, someone using tragedy to justify lawlessness. And it was convincing. "Brant bought this," Darian said. "Of course he did. But that doesn't matter if people believe it. And some do." Ruth paused. "Some don't, though. Some of us remember other families that disappeared, other suspicious fires, other times Brant got what he wanted and the law looked away." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you're not as alone as you think. There are people out here who'd help if they knew how. People who are tired of Brant running this territory like his personal kingdom." She handed him a list of names. "These folks can be trusted, not with everything maybe, but enough to matter." Darian looked at the list, 12 names scattered across different settlements. Not an army, but not nothing either. "Why are you doing this?" Ruth's expression hardened. "Because my brother owned land Brant wanted. He refused to sell, so one night his irrigation got poisoned and his cattle died. Took him 3 years to recover, and by then the debt forced him to sell anyway. To Brant, for pennies on the dollar." She met Darian's eyes. "I can't fight him myself, but I can help someone who will." Darian left Granger's Point with more than supplies. He left with something that had been missing from their campaign, the beginning of a network, the possibility of support that extended beyond just him and Celine. But he also left with the newspaper, and he knew that showing it to Celine would hurt her in ways bullets hadn't. He was right. When he returned to camp and handed her the paper, he watched the hope drain from her face as she read. Her hands shook slightly, and when she finished, she set it down with careful precision. "So I'm the villain now," she said quietly. "To some people, not everyone. Doesn't matter if it's everyone. Brant's changed the story, made me the aggressor, made himself the victim of a crazy woman who won't accept justice." She laughed bitterly. "It's brilliant, really. Can't fight what I can prove, so he fights who I am instead." The people who matter know the truth. Do they? Or do they just know what they've been told? Celine stood, paced the small cabin despite her leg. "Thomas always said the person who controls the narrative controls the outcome. Brant understands that. He's not just fighting us with guns, he's fighting us with words, with perception. Then we change the perception. How? We can't buy newspaper space, can't reach the people who read this and believe it." Darian pulled out Ruth's list. "Maybe not all of them, but we can reach some. Build our own network of people who know what Brant really is." Celine studied the names, and some of the devastation in her expression eased. "Grassroots?" What? It's a political term Thomas used, building support from the ground up instead of the top down. She looked at Darian. We can't beat Brant in the courts or the newspapers, but maybe we can beat him in the hearts and minds of the people he's been hurting. It was a shift in strategy, moving from direct action to something more subtle and lasting. Over the next month, they made contact with the people on Ruth's list, carefully, always ready to run if it was a trap. But it wasn't a trap. One by one, they found allies. A blacksmith whose son had disappeared after witnessing one of Brant's men commit murder, a widow whose husband had died in a suspicious accident after refusing to falsify land records, a shopkeeper who'd been forced to buy stolen goods or lose his business. Each had their own grievance, their own reason to want Brant brought down. And each added their voice to the growing chorus of accusation that Celine's campaign had started. Hayes was the next target, the scarred man from Bridger's Crossing who'd beaten Celine and left her to die. They found him in a settlement called Wardville, collecting protection money from businesses that couldn't afford to refuse. Darian and Celine watched him work for 2 days, documenting his route, his methods, the fear he inspired in ordinary people just trying to survive. I want to kill him, Celine said on the second night, watching Hayes laugh with his companions outside a saloon. Every time I see his face, I want to put a bullet through it. But you won't. No, because dead, he's just another body. Alive and exposed, he's proof. They took him in broad daylight, in front of witnesses. Hayes was coming out of a general store, pockets full of money he'd extorted, when Celine stepped into his path. Recognition flashed across his face, first surprise, then calculation, then fear, as he saw Darian flanking him with a rifle. Hands where I can see them, Darian said. Hayes complied, raising his hands slowly. Around them, people had stopped to watch, drawn by the sudden tension. You remember me? Celine asked. Yeah, I remember. Tell them what you did. Go to hell. Celine pulled her pistol, aimed it at his knee. You broke my leg in 3 places, beat me until I couldn't stand, and left me to die in the wilderness. Tell these people why. Hayes' eyes darted around, looking for escape, for backup that wasn't coming. I was following orders. Whose orders? You know whose. Say his name. The crowd was growing, people emerging from buildings to see what was happening. Darian could feel the weight of their attention, the way this moment was balancing on a knife edge. Silas Brant, Hayes said finally. I work for Silas Brant, and he told me to eliminate the Merrick family because they had evidence of his crimes. Silence fell across the street. You murdered 2 children, Celine said, her voice carrying to everyone watching. A 7-year-old girl and a 5-year-old boy. You locked them in a burning house and listened to them scream. I didn't, Hayes started, then stopped. Something in Celine's expression told him that lying would only make it worse. I was there, but I didn't light the fire. Who did? Brant. He wanted to make sure, wanted them to suffer. Someone in the crowd made a sound of disgust. Others were murmuring, the kind of shocked whisper that spread like contagion. Celine lowered her gun. You're going to tell this story to everyone who'll listen. You're going to name names, describe what you did, explain how Brant's empire is built on murdered families and stolen land. And if you run, if you disappear, I will hunt you to the ends of the earth and make sure your death takes days. They'll kill me if I talk. They'll kill you anyway. This way you die with a clean conscience. It was a lie. Hayes would never have a clean conscience, but it gave him something to cling to. They left him standing in the street, shaking and surrounded by witnesses who'd heard every word. The story exploded across the frontier within days. Hayes, terrified or genuinely remorseful or simply trying to save his own skin, did exactly what Celine had demanded. He went from settlement to settlement, confessing in public, naming Brant as the architect of atrocities that people had suspected but never confirmed. The territorial press tried to dismiss it as coerced testimony, but you couldn't control word of mouth. The story spread faster than newspapers could print denials, and each telling added new details as other victims found courage to speak. Brant's empire wasn't falling, not yet, but it was cracking in ways money couldn't fix, and Brant knew it. The ambush came without warning in the first week of April. Darian and Celine had moved to the 4th mining camp, higher and more remote than the others. They'd started to feel almost safe, started to believe they might actually survive this. Then the shooting started. Darian was outside checking their warning systems when the first bullet tore through the air so close he felt the displacement. He dropped, rolled behind a boulder, his rifle already coming up as he scanned for the shooter. More shots from multiple directions. Professional work, coordinated, designed to pin them down and eliminate escape routes. "Celine!" he shouted. Her response came from inside the cabin, 3 rapid pistol shots through the window, suppressing fire to give Darian time to move. He ran in a crouch, bullets kicking up snow around his feet, and dove through the door as return fire chewed splinters from the frame. "How many?" Celine asked. She was bleeding from a cut above her eye, glass from the window scattered across the floor. 6 at least, maybe more. Professional? Very. Brandt had sent his best, the ones who knew how to work as a team, who wouldn't make the mistakes Pike and Hayes had made. This wasn't about capture or confession. This was extermination. They fought from the cabin for what felt like hours, but was probably 30 minutes. Darian's ammunition was running low, and he could see the same desperation building in Celine's movements. The attackers were patient, professional, willing to wait them out. "We need to move," Celine said. "We stay here, we die here." "Where?" "They've got all the approaches covered." "Then we don't use the approaches." The cabin backed up against a sheer rock face, which was why they'd chosen it. Impossible to attack from that direction. But there was a crack in the rock, barely wide enough for a person, that led to a narrow ledge above the camp. Celine had explored it days ago, dismissed it as a dead end. But a dead end for escape was a perfect blind spot for attack. "You can't climb with that leg," Darian said. "Watch me." They gathered what they could carry. Weapons, ammunition, a single canteen. Then Celine went first, pulling herself into the crack using upper body strength while Darian provided covering fire. He watched her struggle upward, her bad leg dragging uselessly, sheer determination carrying her when strength failed. When she disappeared over the top, he followed, the crack so narrow his shoulders scraped both sides. The ledge above was barely 4 feet wide, running along the cliff face for maybe 20 yards before ending at another vertical wall. From here, they could see the entire camp spread below, and the men attacking it. Darian counted 8 shooters, positioned in a loose perimeter, focused on the cabin. They hadn't noticed the escape yet. "We can't shoot them all before they figure out where we are," Darian whispered. Celine's smile was grim. "Don't need to shoot them all, just need to collapse their advantage." She pointed to a section of overhang above the camp, where winter's snow had built up into a cornice heavy enough to kill. The angle was tricky, the distance extreme, but if they could trigger a collapse— "It's a long shot," Darian said. "Everything about this has been a long shot." They both fired at the same moment, their bullets punching into the snow structure. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then the cornice gave way with a sound like thunder, tons of snow and ice cascading down onto the camp below. The avalanche caught 3 men directly, buried them under white death. The others scattered, their coordinated attack dissolving into chaos and panic. Darian and Celine used the confusion to move along the ledge, finding a descent path that put them on the opposite side of the camp from the survivors. By the time the attackers regrouped, their quarry had vanished into the high country timber. They ran until Celine couldn't anymore, until her leg finally gave out completely and she collapsed in the snow. "Go," she gasped. "Leave me. Get yourself out." "Not a chance." Darian got her on his back. She weighed almost nothing after months of hard living and kept moving. Behind them, he could hear pursuit, but the snow and terrain made tracking difficult. Darkness was falling and the temperature was dropping fast. They found shelter in a cave barely deep enough to count, nothing more than a depression in the rock. Darian built a fire he knew was dangerous but necessary. They'd both die of exposure without it. Celine was shaking uncontrollably, shock and exhaustion taking their toll. Darian wrapped her in both their blankets and held her close, sharing body heat. "We can't keep doing this," he said quietly. "I know. Every time we hit Brandt, he hits back harder. Eventually, he's going to connect, and we won't walk away." "I know," Celine repeated. She was crying now, silent tears tracking through the dirt on her face. "But I can't stop. Can't let them win. Can't let my family's deaths mean nothing." "They don't mean nothing. Look what you've started. People are talking, questioning, standing up. That's more than most get. It's not enough." "Maybe it has to be." Celine pulled back to look at him, and in the firelight her eyes were ancient and exhausted. "Are you asking me to quit?"
I'm asking you to live.
I am living. For the first time since they died, I'm actually living instead of just surviving. Her hand found his, squeezed with what little strength she had left. You understand that, don't you? This campaign, this fight, it's the only thing keeping me from disappearing into grief.
Darian did understand, more than he wanted to admit. He'd spent years after Sarah's death existing in a gray void where nothing mattered and everything hurt. Only taking in Celine had pulled him back into the world of consequence and connection. Then we see it through, he said, but we do it smart. No more camps in the mountains. They can track us here. We go where Brant can't reach. Where's that? Into his own territory, into the places he controls, hide in plain sight among the people he's oppressing. It was audacious to the point of insanity, but it was also the last place Brant would expect them to go. They'd spent months running and hiding. Maybe it was time to stand still and fight from the shadows of his own empire. Celine's laugh was weak but genuine. You're crazier than I am. Probably. They stayed in the cave through the night, taking turns on watch, listening to the wind howl outside. In the morning, they'd start the descent back into the territories, back into danger. But for now, in this small circle of firelight, they had each other and the stubborn refusal to quit that had kept them both alive this long. It would have to be enough. The descent took 3 days, and Celine's leg worsened with every mile. By the time they reached the lower elevations, she could barely put weight on it without her face going white. Darian watched the deterioration with growing dread, recognizing the signs of permanent damage setting in. The joint was grinding bone on bone now, cartilage destroyed by months of abuse and inadequate healing. We need to find a doctor, he said on the morning of the 4th day. No doctors. They'll report us. Then you'll lose the leg entirely. Celine met his eyes with that stubborn fire he'd come to know too well. Then I lose it. Won't be the first thing this cost me. They were camped in a ravine outside a settlement called Deerfield, close enough to Brant's main ranch that the risk felt suicidal. But that was the point. Brant's men would be searching the frontier edges, not his own backyard. Darian had made contact with one of Ruth's names here, a stable owner named Marcus Chen, who'd lost his daughter when she witnessed something she shouldn't have. Marcus had agreed to hide them in exchange for nothing more than the satisfaction of watching Brant's world burn. The stable sat on the edge of Deerfield, a ramshackle building that smelled of hay and manure and horses. Marcus met them after dark, a lean man in his 50s with eyes that had seen too much grief. You're smaller than I expected, he told Celine. I get that a lot. Come on. Got a room in the back that doesn't officially exist. The room was barely 8 by 10, windowless, with a cot and a barrel for water. But it was warm and hidden, and after weeks in the high country it felt like luxury. Marcus brought them food, real food, not dried rations, and news. Town's buzzing about you two, he said. Half the people think you're heroes. Other half think you're terrorists who need hanging. Brant's offering $3,000 now for proof you're dead. Business must be good if he can afford that, Darian said. Business is panicking. You've got people questioning him, refusing to cooperate, even organizing. There's talk of taking complaints to the territorial governor, bypassing the local law entirely. Celine leaned forward despite the pain it caused. Will that work? Marcus shrugged. Depends if the governor's as bought as everyone else. But even the attempt scares Brant. He's used to controlling the narrative, and you've broken that control. Where's he now? Main ranch, about 8 miles west. Never leaves anymore. Too afraid someone will take a shot at him. Marcus smiled without humor. Man who built his power on fear is finally learning what it feels like. After Marcus left, Celine and Darian sat in the small room, both thinking the same thing, but neither wanting to say it first. Finally, Darian broke the silence. We could end this. Go to his ranch. Finish it. Suicide mission. Maybe, but we're running out of options. Your leg won't last much longer, we're almost out of money, and Brant's not going to stop hunting us. Celine was quiet for a long time, staring at the wall, like she could see through it to something beyond. When she spoke, her voice was thoughtful rather than combative. I've been thinking about what victory looks like. Back when this started, I just wanted him dead. Wanted to put a bullet in him and watch him bleed out like my family did. She paused. But that's not enough anymore. Killing him makes him a martyr, lets his organization continue under new management. Everything stays the same except I'm dead too.
What's the alternative? Destruction. Complete public destruction of everything he is. I want him to lose his power, his reputation, his ability to hurt anyone ever again, and I want him to live with it, to see what he built turn to ash. Darian recognized the shift in her thinking, from revenge to something colder and more strategic. She was learning what he'd known for years, that death was often too easy, that real justice required more precision. How do we do that? We make him confess. In front of witnesses who matter, people who can't be bought or silenced. We strip away every protection he's built and leave him naked in front of the world he terrorized. He'll never confess voluntarily. Celine's smile was sharp enough to draw blood. Then we make it involuntary. Over the next 2 weeks, they planned with a meticulousness that bordered on obsession. Marcus provided intelligence about Brant's ranch, the layout, the guard rotations, the patterns of movement. Other allies contributed pieces of the puzzle. A maid who worked in the main house and owed Brant nothing but hatred. A supply driver who passed through the gates twice weekly. A former ranch hand who'd quit rather than participate in the violence. The picture that emerged was of a man under siege in his own fortress. Brant rarely left his main house, surrounded himself with armed guards at all times, and had installed locks and reinforcements that turned the building into a prison. He was paranoid, drinking heavily, lashing out at subordinates over imagined slights. He's breaking, Celine observed, studying the reports. The pressure's getting to him. Broken men are unpredictable. Good. Unpredictable means mistakes. The opening came from an unexpected source, Brant's own arrogance. Word spread through Deerfield that he was hosting a gathering at his ranch, a show of strength meant to prove he wasn't hiding. He'd invited local officials, business owners, anyone with influence in the territory. A party designed to demonstrate that Silas Brant was still the power in this region, still untouchable. He's trying to reset the narrative, Darian said, and giving us exactly the audience we need. The plan was simple in concept, nightmarishly complex in execution. They'd infiltrate the gathering using forged credentials Marcus could provide, get close to Brant, and force a public confession in front of the very people whose support kept him in power. And if it doesn't work, Darian asked, then we die trying, but at least we die taking him down with us. They spent days preparing, drilling the plan until they could execute it half asleep. Celine practiced walking without her limp, learned to hide the pain that came with every step. Darian memorized faces from sketches Marcus provided, identified who could be trusted and who would raise the alarm. The night before the gathering, Celine couldn't sleep. Darian found her sitting in the dark, her bad legs stretched out in front of her, fingers absently tracing the shape of old scars. Having second thoughts? He asked. Always, but I'm doing it anyway. He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. They'd been living in each other's pockets for months now, their lives so intertwined that Darian sometimes forgot where his decisions ended and hers began. You know this might not work, he said quietly. We could do everything right and still fail. I know. And if we fail, we die. Not eventually, not maybe. We walk into that ranch and don't walk out. Celine turned to look at him, and in the dim light, her face was softer than he'd seen in weeks. You don't have to come. This was always my fight, my family, my vendetta. You've done more than anyone could ask. If you want to walk away, I won't blame you. You think I could do that? Just leave you to face this alone? I think you've already lost one family. I don't want to be the reason you lose your life, too. Darian took her hand, scarred, calloused, shaking slightly despite her attempts to control it. Sarah and the kids, they died and I couldn't do anything except watch. Just helpless, useless, watching them slip away while I stood there. His voice cracked. But this? This I can do something about, can stand beside someone who refuses to quit, who fights back even when the odds are impossible. That matters to me. You matter to me. Celine's eyes were bright with tears she refused to let fall. I'm going to get you killed. Maybe. Or maybe we'll actually pull this off and live to regret it. He squeezed her hand. Either way, I'm with you until the end. She leaned into him then, her head on his shoulder, and they sat in the darkness sharing the weight of what was coming. Not lovers, not quite, but something deeper. Two broken people who'd found in each other a reason to keep fighting. Thank you, Celine whispered,
for pulling me out of that ravine, for not leaving me to die, for believing this mattered. Always. The gathering was set for a Saturday evening, and by midday the roads leading to Brant's ranch were crowded with carriages and riders. Darian and Celine approached on foot, dressed in borrowed finery that made them almost unrecognizable. Darian in a suit that didn't quite fit, Celine in a dress that hid her weapons and mostly concealed her limp.
Marcus had forged invitations identifying them as representatives from a mining concern interested in purchasing land. The credentials were good enough to pass the cursory inspection at the gate, and they were waved through with the rest of the guests. Brant's ranch was massive, the main house a testament to wealth built on other people's suffering. 3 stories of whitewashed wood and glass, with a wraparound porch and columns that tried too hard to evoke southern plantation grandeur. Behind it stretched barns, bunkhouses, and corrals that housed the machinery of his empire. Inside, the gathering was already in full swing. The main hall had been transformed into something approximating elegance. Tables laden with food, musicians playing in the corner, guests mingling in clusters defined by status and allegiance. Darian estimated 60 people, maybe more, all dressed in their frontier best, and at the center of it all stood Silas Brant. He was smaller than Darian expected. A compact man in his 50s with silver hair and the kind of face that photographs well. Handsome in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes, which were calculating and cold even when he smiled. He worked the room with practiced ease, shaking hands, laughing at jokes, playing the role of magnanimous host. Watching him, Darian felt rage building in his chest. This was the man who'd ordered children burned alive, who'd built an empire on murder and fear, who'd hunted Celine across the frontier like an animal. "Easy," Celine murmured beside him. "Not yet." They circulated separately, drawing less attention that way. Darian listened to conversations, gauged the room's mood. Most of the guests were here out of obligation rather than affection, fear masquerading as respect. They laughed at Brant's jokes because not laughing had consequences. But there were true believers too, people who'd profited from Brant's system and saw no reason to question it. Those would be the dangerous ones when things went wrong. Celine had positioned herself near the main staircase where she could see the entire room. Darian caught her eye across the crowd, received a subtle nod. Everything was in place. Now they just needed the opening. It came an hour into the gathering when Brant climbed onto a small platform to address his guests. "Friends," he began, his voice carrying across the hall, "I want to thank you all for coming tonight. These past months have been difficult for all of us, with rumors and accusations flying from people who'd rather tear down than build up." He was setting up his defense, framing Celine's campaign as groundless attacks from a disturbed woman. "But we've weathered the storm together, and we'll continue to prosper because we understand what this territory needs. Order, stability, the strong hand of leadership that makes civilization possible on the frontier." The crowd applauded on cue, and Brant basked in it. That's when Celine moved. She climbed the stairs to the platform with deliberate slowness, her limp pronounced, her dress rustling in the sudden silence that fell across the room. Darian's hand moved to his concealed pistol, ready for the violence he knew was coming. Brant saw her and froze, recognition flashing across his face, followed immediately by calculation. His guard started forward, but he stopped them with a raised hand. "Well," he said, recovery smooth and quick. "Celine Merrick, I'd heard you were dead. Disappointed?" "Merely surprised, though I suppose I shouldn't be. You've proven remarkably difficult to kill." He smiled at the crowd, including them in the joke. "Mrs. Merrick has been telling some very creative stories about me. I'm curious what brings her to my home." "The truth," Celine said simply. "The truth." Brant's laugh was practiced, dismissive. "My dear, you wouldn't know the truth if it burned your house down." The jab was calculated cruelty, meant to provoke her into rage, into making a scene that would let him paint her as hysterical. But Celine's expression didn't change. "You're right," she said. "I do know what that feels like. Because you did burn my house down, with my husband and children inside." The room had gone absolutely silent now, every guest frozen as they watched the confrontation unfold. "That's a serious accusation," Brant said carefully. "One you've made before without evidence." "I have evidence. I have Hayes's confession, Pike's testimony before he died, Carver's admission of collecting money to fund your operations." Celine's voice was steady, clear, carrying to every corner of the hall. But more than that, I have you. Because we both know I'm telling the truth, and we both know you're going to deny it. That's what men like you do. Lie with conviction and hope everyone's too afraid to question. This is my home, and you're not welcome here. Guards, touch her, and I kill you where you stand. Darian's voice cut through the room as he stepped forward, pistol drawn and aimed at Brant's chest. Around them, guests screamed and scrambled for cover, but Darian's focus never wavered. Brant's guards reached for their weapons, but Celine already had hers out, covering the other side of the platform. Everyone stay calm, she said. We're not here to hurt anyone except the man who's been hurting this entire territory for 15 years. You're insane, Brant said, but there was fear in his voice now, the control slipping. You'll never leave here alive. Probably not, but neither will you. And everyone here is going to hear what you did before we both die. Celine gestured to the crowd. These are your people, Silas. Your supporters, your business partners, the ones who look the other way when convenient. Tell them the truth. Tell them about Thomas Merrick and his family. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Thomas found proof of your land fraud, documents showing you'd been filing false claims for years, stealing property from people who couldn't fight back. He was going to take it to the territorial governor, expose everything. So you killed him, killed his wife, killed his children, and tried to kill me. That's a lie. Celine pulled back her dress sleeve, revealing the scars that covered her arm. These are from your men beating me, from being left to die in the wilderness. This leg, she stomped it for emphasis, wincing at the pain, was broken in 3 places by Hayes while you watched. Don't tell me it's a lie when I carry the proof on my body. Brant looked out at the crowd, saw the doubt in their faces, the questions forming. His empire had been built on certainty and fear, and both were crumbling in real time. Even if what you say is true, he said carefully, what do you expect to accomplish here? You think these people will suddenly turn on me? That justice will magically appear because you made a scene? No, Celine said. I think you're going to confess. Right here, right now, in front of everyone who's enabled you. And why would I do that? Because I'm giving you a choice. Confess and live. Disgraced, destroyed, but alive. Or refuse, and Darian puts a bullet through your skull. Either way, everyone here learns the truth. Brant's laugh was desperate now, the sound of a man watching his world collapse. You're bluffing. You won't kill me in cold blood in front of witnesses. You're right, Celine admitted. I won't. Because I want you to live with what you've done. Want you to spend every remaining day of your miserable life knowing that the woman you tried to erase was the one who destroyed you. She paused. But Darian? Darian doesn't have my restraint. He watched his family die helpless. He's not inclined to let the same happen to someone who matters to him. Darian cocked the pistol, the sound loud in the silent hall. Your choice, Brant. Talk or die. The seconds stretched out, tension building until it felt like the air itself might shatter. Brant looked around the room one more time, at the guards who hadn't moved, at the guests who were watching him with new eyes, at the empire he'd built crumbling around him. I did it, he said finally, the words barely a whisper. Louder, Celine demanded. I did it, Brant's voice cracked, rage and despair mixing into something ugly. Thomas Merrick found documents proving I'd been filing fraudulent land claims. He threatened to expose me, to destroy everything I'd built. So yes, I gave the order. Had Hayes and his men burn the homestead with the family inside. Watched it burn myself to make sure the job was done. The crowd erupted in chaos, shouting, gasping, some people trying to leave while others pushed forward for a better view. But Darian kept his gun trained on Brant, and Celine kept her position on the platform. Why? Someone in the crowd called out. Why kill children? Brant's laugh was broken, bitter. Because mercy is weakness out here. Because leaving witnesses gets you hanged. Because I built this empire on doing whatever was necessary, and I won't apologize for it. And all the others? Celine pressed. How many families, Silas? How many people disappeared or died mysteriously because they threatened your interests? I don't know. Dozens? Does it matter? They were in my way. It was everything Celine had wanted, a full confession in front of witnesses who couldn't be bought or silenced. But watching Brant unravel, watching him confirm every terrible thing she'd accused him of, brought no satisfaction, just exhaustion and the weight of everything this fight had cost. "It matters," she said quietly. "Every single one of them matters." One of Brant's guards finally moved, reaching for his weapon. Darian shot him, not to kill, but to disable, the bullet taking him in the shoulder. The man went down screaming, and the remaining guards froze. "Anyone else?" Darian asked conversationally. No one moved. Celine stepped back from the platform, her leg threatening to give out. "Territorial Marshal is corrupt, so we're not calling him. Someone find the Federal Marshal out of Crescent Valley. Tell him Silas Brant just confessed to multiple murders in front of 60 witnesses." "You've made a mistake," Brant said, but his voice held no conviction now. "You think this changes anything? You think confession matters when I own half the law in 3 territories?"
"Maybe it doesn't," Celine admitted. "Maybe you'll buy your way out of this like you've bought your way out of everything else. But everyone here knows now. Can't unhear your confession, can't unknow what you are. Your power came from fear and reputation, and both just died." She turned to leave, done with him, done with this place. But Brant's voice followed her across the hall. "You destroyed me," he called out. "Took everything I built. Was it worth it? Was revenge worth what it cost you?"
Celine paused at the door, looked back one final time. "This wasn't revenge," she said. "This was justice. And yes, it was worth every single thing I lost to get it." Then she walked out into the night, Darian beside her, leaving behind a room full of witnesses and a man whose empire had finally collapsed under the weight of his own confession. They made it maybe half a mile before Celine's leg gave out completely. She went down hard, crying out in pain, and Darian caught her before she hit the ground. Blood was seeping through her dress. She'd reopened something during the confrontation, stress and adrenaline masking the damage. "We need to stop," Darian said. "No, have to keep moving. Guards will come after us once they recover." But she couldn't stand, couldn't walk. The leg that had carried her through months of fighting had finally surrendered. Darian got her on his back again, started moving toward where they'd hidden their horses. Behind them, he could hear shouting from the ranch, see lights moving in the darkness. Pursuit was coming, and this time they had no strength left to run. They'd made it perhaps another quarter mile when Darian felt Celine's grip loosen, felt her weight go slack against his back. "Celine, stay with me, Celine!" No response. He laid her down carefully, felt for a pulse, and found it. Weak, thready. But there. She'd passed out from pain and exhaustion and blood loss, her body finally demanding the rest she'd refused to give it. Darian looked back toward the ranch, where pursuit was organizing. Looked down at Celine, unconscious and bleeding. Did the math on their chances and came up with numbers that didn't work. They weren't going to make it. But maybe that was all right. Maybe they'd done enough. The confession had happened, witnessed by dozens of people who couldn't all be silenced. Brant's empire was broken, even if the man himself survived. They'd accomplished what they'd set out to do. Darian picked Celine up, cradled her against his chest, and kept walking. Not toward the horses anymore. They'd never reach them, but toward a line of cottonwoods that offered some cover. If he could find a defensible position, he could hold off pursuit long enough for Celine to regain consciousness. After that, they'd figure something out. They always did. He'd made it to the trees when riders appeared out of the darkness ahead. Darian raised his pistol, ready for the last stand, ready to go down fighting. Then he recognized the lead rider, Marcus Chen, with a dozen others behind him. Not Brant's men. Allies. "Heard you might need an exit strategy," Marcus called. Darian nearly collapsed with relief. "You heard right." They got Celine onto a horse, got Darian mounted, and rode hard into the night. Behind them, Brant's pursuit reached the cottonwoods and found nothing but tracks leading in every direction. Marcus's people had laid false trails, bought them precious time. By dawn, they were 20 miles away and still riding. Celine woke sometime around noon, groggy and disoriented. "What happened?" "We survived," Darian told her. "Again?" "Did it work? Did he confess?" He confessed. Everyone heard. Celine closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, something like peace crossed her face. "Good," she whispered. "That's good." Then she passed out again, and Darian held her steady in the saddle as they rode toward whatever came next. Marcus took them north, deeper into territory where Brant's name carried less weight and federal jurisdiction held more sway. The safe house was a farmstead owned by Marcus's cousin, a taciturn woman named Elizabeth, who asked no questions and offered simple kindness, clean beds, hot food, and a doctor who knew when to keep his mouth shut. The doctor looked at Celine's leg and shook his head. "Joints destroyed," he said bluntly. "Bone fragments, no cartilage left, infection scarring throughout. She needs surgery I can't provide, and even then she'll never walk right again." "Can you stop the pain?" Darian asked. "I can manage it, but she needs to stop putting weight on it, stop pushing it past what it can do. Otherwise she'll lose it entirely." Celine, conscious now and listening, laughed without humor. "Story of my life, always one step ahead of losing everything." The doctor left laudanum and instructions, then disappeared back to wherever he'd come from. Elizabeth brought soup and bread, set it beside the bed, and left them alone. They stayed at the farmstead for 2 weeks while Celine healed enough to travel. During that time, news filtered in from the territories, fragmentary reports that painted a picture neither of them had fully expected. Brant's confession had spread like wildfire. Within days, every settlement from Crescent Valley to Bridger's Crossing knew what he'd admitted to in front of 60 witnesses. The territorial press tried to contain the damage, published editorials questioning the reliability of testimony given under duress, but it was too late. The story had taken on a life of its own. Federal marshals arrived from Crescent Valley and arrested Brant on multiple charges: murder, fraud, conspiracy, intimidation. His lawyers screamed about coercion and inadmissible evidence, but the sheer number of witnesses made dismissal impossible. For the first time in 15 years, Silas Brant was going to face actual justice. His organization collapsed within a month. Without Brant's leadership, the network of corruption and violence fell apart. Hayes disappeared, probably fled to Mexico. Carver was found dead in a ditch, killed by someone settling an old score. The corrupt officials who'd enabled Brant suddenly discovered principles and began cooperating with investigators to save their own skins. It was everything Celine had fought for, and she received the news with hollow satisfaction. "We won," Darian said one evening, reading the latest report.
"Did we?" Celine was sitting by the window, her bad leg propped on a stool. "Brant's in jail, but he's still alive, still has lawyers, still has money. Might even beat this if his connections are deep enough. He won't. Too many people saw him confess. Too many witnesses."
"Maybe." She was quiet for a moment. "Thomas used to say that justice on the frontier was whatever you could make stick, that the law was just words on paper unless someone had the courage to enforce it." She touched her leg absently. "We made it stick, but I keep wondering what he'd think of what I became to do it. He'd think you were brave, or crazy, or dangerous." Celine's smile was sad. "I killed people, Darian. Not directly, maybe, but Pike died because of what I set in motion. That man at your ranch. Others I don't even know about. How do I square that with the woman I was before?" Darian moved to sit beside her, his own body carrying new scars from the months of fighting. "You don't. The woman you were before died in that fire along with your family. This version of you, the one who survived, she did what she had to do. Maybe that's not pretty or clean or morally simple, but it's real. Does it get easier, living with it? No. But you learn to carry it." They sat in the fading light, two people who'd been forged by violence into something harder than they'd started. Outside, Elizabeth was feeding chickens, the mundane rhythm of farm life continuing regardless of the wars fought in its shadow. "What happens now?" Celine asked. "You need surgery, real surgery, in a city with actual doctors." "Can't afford that. Marcus says there are people willing to help, folks who see what you did and want to support it." Darian paused. "You've become something of a symbol." Celine laughed, the sound bitter. "A symbol? That's rich. The crippled woman who fought back. Very inspiring." "It is, though. Whether you wanted it or not, you showed people that power isn't permanent, that predators can be brought down. That matters to folks who've spent their whole lives being afraid. And what about you? What do you do when I'm off getting surgery?" The question hung between them, laden with implications neither had fully addressed. They'd been partners in violence, allies in survival, but what were they now that the fighting was over? "Thought I might head back to my ranch," Darian said carefully. "See what's left of it. Maybe rebuild. Alone? Unless you've got a better idea." Celine met his eyes, and something passed between them, an acknowledgement of what had grown during the months of shared danger. Not love, maybe. Not in the simple way people usually meant. But something deeper and more durable. forged under conditions that burned away everything false. "I might," she said, "if you're willing to wait for me to heal. I've gotten pretty good at waiting." The surgery happened in Denver, paid for by donations from people across the territories who'd followed Celine's campaign. The doctor was a young man with modern training who specialized in reconstructive work, and he was honest about the limitations. "I can repair some of the damage, stabilize the joint, remove the bone fragments causing the worst pain," he explained. "But you'll always have a limp, always have limitations on mobility. This leg will never be what it was. Just make it so I can walk without wanting to scream," Celine said. The surgery took 4 hours, and the recovery was brutal. Celine spent 2 months in Denver, learning to walk again on a leg that had been rebuilt from the inside out. Darian visited when he could, bringing news from the territories and updates on the ranch he was slowly resurrecting. Brant's trial proceeded without them. Their testimony had been given to federal prosecutors, and neither Darian nor Celine had any desire to see him again. The verdict, when it came, was guilty on all counts. Life imprisonment in a federal facility, no possibility of parole. Some people called it justice. Others called it inadequate payment for decades of violence. Celine called it finished. "He's locked in a cage for the rest of his life," she told Darian when the verdict came through. "Can't hurt anyone, can't rebuild, can't do anything except sit with what he did. That's enough." By late summer, Celine was mobile enough to travel. The limp was permanent, pronounced enough that she'd never pass for able-bodied, but the constant agony had faded to manageable pain. She could walk, could ride for short distances, could function without laudanum clouding her thoughts. Darian met her at the Denver station with 2 horses and a smile that made her chest tight. "Ready to go home?" he asked. "Where's home?" "Guess we'll find out." The ride north took a week, and Celine watched the landscape transform from city to frontier with mixed feelings. This territory held so much pain: her family's death, months of running and fighting, the transformation from wife and mother into something harder and less forgiving. But it also held possibility. They stopped in settlements along the way, and Celine was surprised by the reception. People recognized her, wanted to shake her hand, tell her stories about how her campaign had changed things. Small changes, mostly. A corrupt official voted out, a fraudulent land claim challenged, people standing up to intimidation they'd previously accepted. "You started something," one woman told her in a trading post outside Granger's Point. "Showed us we didn't have to accept the way things were." It was uncomfortable, being treated as inspiration when Celine still felt like a grieving widow who'd gotten lucky. But she accepted the gratitude with as much grace as she could manage, understanding that symbols mattered to people in ways the person behind the symbol couldn't control. Darian's ranch looked both better and worse than she'd expected. He'd rebuilt the house, repaired the damage from the attack, and added a second bedroom. The barn had been expanded, the fences reinforced, and there were improvements everywhere that spoke of a man planning for a future that included more than just himself. "It's not much," Darian said as they dismounted, "but it's solid. And it's ours if you want it." Celine looked at the valley spread below them, the mountains rising beyond, the isolation that had once seemed like imprisonment and now felt like freedom. "I want it," she said. They settled into a rhythm that felt both strange and natural, 2 damaged people learning to build something together that wasn't defined by violence or survival. Darian taught Celine the rhythms of ranch work, adapted tasks to accommodate her limitations. Celine brought order and planning to operations that had been running on exhaustion and habit. It wasn't romantic, not in any conventional sense. They were too scarred for that, too aware of everything they'd lost to pretend this was some fairy tale ending. But there was partnership, respect, and a fierce loyalty that felt more valuable than any romance could have been. The nightmares came for both of them. Darian dreaming of Sarah and the kids, Celine reliving the fire and her family's screams. They'd wake in the night and find each other in the darkness, sharing the weight of grief that never fully faded. "Does it get better?" Celine asked one night, after a particularly bad dream left her shaking. "It gets different. The pain doesn't go away, but you learn to live around it, build new things that matter alongside the old losses. I keep seeing Anna's face, keep hearing her calling for me while the house burned." Darian held her while she cried, offered no platitudes or promises that the pain would end. He'd learned that some wounds never healed, you just got stronger at carrying them. As fall turned toward winter, they received their first visitor, a young woman with a black eye and a desperate story about escaping a violent husband. She'd heard about Celine Merrick, about the ranch run by people who'd fought back against power, and she'd come hoping for sanctuary. Celine and Darian looked at each other across the table, having a silent conversation about risk and responsibility and the choice to get involved. "You can stay," Celine said finally, "as long as you need." The woman was the first, but not the last. Over the following months, others arrived, people fleeing violence, running from debts they couldn't pay, escaping situations that would kill them if they stayed. Each had heard stories about Merrick Hollow, the name the ranch had acquired somewhere along the way, a place where broken people could find shelter. Darian and Celine never turned anyone away. They built additional cabins as the settlement grew, established rules and responsibilities, created a community bound not by blood, but by shared understanding of what it meant to survive the unsurvivable. Some people stayed permanently, putting down roots in this remote valley. Others rested and healed before moving on, carrying with them the knowledge that sanctuary existed if they needed it again. Celine found purpose in the work that she hadn't expected. She'd spent so long focused on revenge, on bringing down Brant, that she hadn't thought about what came after. But helping others reclaim their lives from violence gave meaning to everything she'd suffered. Each person who arrived broken and left stronger felt like a small victory against the darkness that had taken her family. "Thomas would have liked this," she told Darian one evening, watching new arrivals settle into one of the cabins. "He always believed in building things, creating community. I destroyed to get justice, but this is construction. You're allowed to do both, allowed to be complicated." Am I? Sometimes I think about who I was before, Thomas's wife, Anna and Thomas Jr.'s mother, and it feels like remembering a stranger. That woman is gone. Maybe. Or maybe she just evolved into someone who could survive what happened to her. Your family's gone, but you're still their mother, still the woman who loved them. That doesn't change just because you also became someone who could fight. Celine considered this, rolling the idea around like a stone worn smooth by water. She'd spent so long seeing herself as transformed by violence that she'd forgotten the parts of her that remained constant, the love, the grief, the fundamental core of who she was. "I want to write it down," she said suddenly. What happened? Thomas and Anna and little Thomas. The fire, the fight, all of it. Want their names preserved somewhere permanent so they're not just forgotten. Over the winter, Celine wrote, she filled journal after journal with memories of her family, not just their deaths, but their lives. Anna's songs about birds, Thomas Jr.'s laughter, Thomas's patient way of explaining complicated ideas. The ordinary moments that made up a life before violence tore it apart. She wrote about the campaign too, documenting names and actions so there would be a record beyond official testimony. Pike's confession, Hayes's cowardice, Brant's final admission of guilt, the people who'd helped along the way, the allies who'd risked everything for strangers. It wasn't pretty writing, wasn't trying to be literature. It was just truth, preserved against the forgetting that time always brought. Darian read some of it one night while Celine was sleeping, and he understood what she was doing, creating a memorial not in stone but in words, ensuring that the people she'd loved and the fight she'd waged would outlive her. Spring came early that year, melting the snow and turning the valley green with new growth. Celine's health was declining in ways both obvious and subtle. The surgery had bought her time, but the damage was too extensive. The years of abuse too severe. Her leg was failing again, pain becoming constant despite medication. Her body was simply wearing out, pushed past what it could endure. The doctor who visited from Denver was honest about the prognosis. Maybe a year, maybe 2 if she was lucky and careful. The injuries, combined with infection scarring and the toll of months living hard, had created a cascade of problems that medicine couldn't reverse. "How long do I have before it gets bad?" Celine asked. "It's already bad. You're just tough enough to hide it, but you'll start declining faster soon. More pain, less mobility, eventually bedridden." The doctor paused. "I'm sorry, there's nothing more I can do." After he left, Celine sat on the porch and looked at the valley with new eyes. Knowing you were dying was different from suspecting it. It made everything sharper, more precious, weighted with the understanding that this time was finite. Darian found her there as the sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of gold and purple. "So," she said without preamble, Looks like I'm dying. He sat beside her, taking her hand. I heard. You going to tell me it'll be all right? No, it won't be all right. It's terrible and unfair, and I hate it. Celine smiled despite everything. That's what I like about you, no false comfort. How do you want to spend the time you have? She'd been thinking about that since the doctor left, weighing options against the reality of her limitations. I want to finish writing, want to see this place stable enough to continue without me, and I want to not die alone if that's asking too much. That's not asking too much. That's asking exactly the right amount. They spent the summer building, not physically, Celine couldn't manage that anymore, but building structure and systems that would let Merrick Hollow survive her death. They established governance by consensus, set up financial arrangements with allies in nearby settlements, and trained people to handle the daily operations. Celine finished her writing in August, filling the last page of the final journal with words about hope and resilience and the stubborn refusal to let violence have the final say. It's done, she told Darian, closing the journal. What do you want me to do with it? Keep it safe, and if anyone ever asks what happened here, what this place means, show them. Let them read about ordinary people who loved each other, about what we lost and what we built from the ashes. The decline came quickly after that, as if finishing the writing had released something she'd been holding in reserve. By September, she was using a wheelchair Darian had commissioned from Denver. By October, she couldn't leave the house without assistance. The pain became constant despite increasing doses of laudanum. Celine fought it as long as she could, maintaining lucidity even when her body was failing. She wanted to be present for whatever time remained, wanted to see the people she'd helped, to know that Merrick Hollow would continue. On a clear morning in late October, she asked Darian to take her outside one last time. He carried her to a chair on the porch, wrapped her in blankets against the cold, and sat beside her. The valley spread before them in full autumn color, aspens turning gold against the evergreen backdrop, the mountains sharp against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. It's beautiful, Celine said, her voice weak but clear. It is. Thank you for pulling me out of that ravine, for not leaving me to die. Thank you for giving me a reason to care again. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the day unfold. People from the settlement passed by, offered quiet greetings, understood without being told that this was goodbye. I'm tired, Celine said eventually. So tired of fighting, of hurting. Then stop fighting. You've earned rest. Will you stay with me? At the end? I'm not going anywhere. Celine closed her eyes, her breathing shallow and uneven. Tell me about Sarah and the kids. Want to hear about people who were loved. So Darian talked, sharing memories he'd kept locked away for years. Sarah's laugh, the way their daughter had loved collecting wildflowers, their son's endless questions about how things worked. He talked about loss and love and the way people lived on in the memories of those who survived them. Celine listened, a small smile on her face. And sometime during the telling, her breathing slowed and then stopped entirely. Darian held her hand for a long time after, watching the sun move across the valley, saying his own goodbye to a woman who'd come into his life, broken, and transformed both of them in the process. They buried her on the hillside overlooking the valley, next to markers Darian placed for Thomas, Anna, and Thomas Jr., a family reunited at least in memory. The entire settlement attended, along with people from nearby towns who'd heard what Merrick Hollow represented. There were no formal words, no religious ceremony, just people sharing stories about how Celine Merrick had changed their lives, had shown them that survival was possible even when everything seemed lost. Darian stood at the grave long after everyone else had left, looking at the simple marker he'd carved with her name and the words she'd chosen weeks before. She fought back. The years that followed saw Merrick Hollow grow from a collection of refugees into a recognized sanctuary throughout the territories. Federal authorities, seeking to prove their commitment to justice after the Brandt scandal, provided official support. The settlement became a model for how communities could support survivors of violence. Darian ran it as long as he could, guided by principles he and Celine had established together. When his own health began to fail, he passed leadership to others they'd trained, trusting that the work would continue. He died in the same house where he'd nursed Celine back from death, surrounded by people whose lives had been changed by a wounded woman and the rancher who'd refused to leave her in a ravine. The journals Celine had written became something of a legend, carefully preserved, occasionally shared with newcomers who needed to understand the history of the place. They told a story not of heroes, but of ordinary people pushed past their limits who chose to fight rather than surrender. Merrick Hollow continued for generations, evolving but maintaining its core purpose. It was never large, never wealthy, never famous beyond the territories. But it mattered to the people who found shelter there, who discovered that they could survive the unsurvivable and build something new from the wreckage. The frontier changed too, slowly becoming less wild, more governed, more accountable. Not perfect, never perfect, but better than it had been. The corruption that Brant represented didn't disappear, but it became harder to maintain, more likely to be challenged. And somewhere in that change was the influence of a crippled woman who'd refused to stay buried, who'd turned grief into action and action into legacy. Her family's names were preserved not just in her journals, but in the memories of everyone who passed through Merrick Hollow and learned that love could transform into justice, that the weakest among us could bring down the powerful, that mercy and strength weren't opposites, but partners. It wasn't the ending Celine had imagined that night in the burning ruins of her homestead. It wasn't the life she'd planned with Thomas and her children, but it was real and it mattered. And in a world that often felt meaningless, that was enough. The valley still stands, marked by simple structures and the graves of two people who found each other in darkness and built something that outlasted them both. Visitors sometimes come, curious about the history, and they read the words carved into Celine's marker. She fought back. 3 simple words that told an entire story of love and loss, violence and survival, revenge and redemption. Of a woman who learned that you could be broken and still be whole, could lose everything and still have something worth fighting for. That sometimes the greatest victory wasn't in winning, but in refusing to quit. And that legacy, more than any monument or memorial, was what Celine Merrick left behind. Proof that one person, even damaged and desperate, could change the world if they were stubborn enough to try.